Well, here we are on a freezing January. We're looking at the Rose because today we're going to talk about Ben Jonson, who is often known as the second most important dramatist in English history, right after William Shakespeare, under the reign of James I. And this theatre here, which is just a stone's throw away from the Globe, where the Globe used to be, is one of the places where Ben worked. He worked here after a scandal which happened at the Swan, which we'll cover once we are up at the Swan. So here he worked under Philip Henslow, who was also the one who had arranged for building this playhouse here. And he worked under what was called the Admiral's Men. So Shakespeare's company was called the Chamberlain's Men. Ben Jonson's company that he was a part of was called the Admiral's Men. Usually because actors, they had to subscribe to a patron, a wealthy patron, such as a Chamberlain or an Admiral or other important figures or an Earl. And that was how they distinguished themselves. They got some kind of prestige and status and also crucial funding for their plays. So here the Rose is apparently where Titus Andronicus was first performed, amongst other things like Henry VI Part 1 took place here. And Ben, when he worked for the Admiral's Men, was apparently more valuable to the company as a writer than an actor, is what is reported by one of his contemporaries. So he wrote many, he's got his start and his launch into fame from here, especially with his play called Every Man in His Humour, and then the later appropriately named Every Man Out of His Humour. Alright, so we are standing right next to the remains of the Rose, which were discovered in an excavation which they did in 1989. So if you ever come down this street, it's called Park Street, you'll see a couple of interesting things because you'll see the original location of the Globe, amongst other things, which is down there, and the remains of the Rose, which was a theatre that was right next to the Globe, at least when the Globe was around here. And you'll notice if you ever come down this street that is full of a lot of construction. There's a lot of new construction projects going on here. The good thing about the construction is they tend to drill down into the ground and they actually quite often find interesting remains. So around this area here they've also found a lot of remains of bear baiting pits, which was another very popular form of entertainment around here, besides theatres of course. It was equivalent to Spanish bullfighting, but imagine it with bears instead. Bears versus dogs. Pretty bit of horrid animal cruelty there. But basically, the construction project, they allow for excavations to happen, and when the remains of this playhouse was discovered, a trust was formed to protect those remains and try and build a visitor center around it. And I believe, we've been trying to figure out how far they are with the process here, but I believe they're still in the process of making this into a visitor center. You can actually come here and visit it on a few days when it's open and get to take part in cold reads, little performances and the like, where they try and revitalize the Rose Theatre. Do what you're supposed to do in a playhouse. They try and add a little bit of their own plays. And you can actually see here, this is a nice little handy map to show. We're right here at the Rose now, so this gives you a contemporary picture of what it would have looked like, very likely. See, it would mostly have been fields and swamplands around here. But we're right at the Rose, and if you then were to go down, turn right down there, you then get to the Globe. So they were right next to each other. You can also see this depicted a bear baiting ring up here of that sport I mentioned. Now, right up there is where we have the new Globe. So the new restored Globe. Our reconstruction of the Globe these days is actually up here, where some of the bear pits or bear baiting pits used to be. So yeah, it's pretty interesting with this area and how they're trying to redevelop it. So who knows, we might get a Rose Theatre soon, along with Globe Theatre.
3, 2, 1.
3, 2, 1. There we go. All right, let's try and get a little poem on Ben Jonson's lewd plays. We are here in South Bank. This is exactly where it happened, so it's appropriate we should get a contemporary poet to reflect on a poet from 400 years ago. A scandalous poet. Naughty sausage. I've only read the end, but I like it already. We're definitely going to read this out.
Okay,
The
good stuff.
bawdy is what we're concerned with. The obscure pubs and double entrances that litter the Elizabethan, the puerile schoolboy cackling, the nudges and winks, the dirty mind that we find couched in luxuriant prose. In the grand organ music of those plays, Ben Jonson, naughty sausage, and locked up and tickled with a feather until he begged for mercy, not merely once but many times, the very naughty sausage. Thank you. Brilliant. That's good.
Thank you.
Okay, so here we are where the Swan Theatre used to be. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of it left. It more or less rotted away at the end of the 17th century, especially after all the theatres closed. But there used to be a theatre here called the Swan Theatre right around here, just below where Blackfriars Railway Bridge is these days. And it was actually the place where Ben Jonson found employment before he joined the Admiral's Men and joined the Rose Theatre. And he premiered a play of his called The Isle of Dogs. Now, unfortunately, that play has been lost to us. We don't know what the play was about or anything of the plot, more or less, because the manuscript is lost to us. It was more or less suppressed after it came out, because what we do know is it sparked controversy when it came out. And it actually caused what was called the Privy Council to shut down all the theatres here in the area because it was considered lewd, too lewd for English society to take part in, and almost traitorous to the crown. So the theatres were shut down, it caused a huge scandal, and Ben Jonson, along with two of his fellow actors, were imprisoned by the Privy Council in Marshalsea Jail. He faced an interrogation there. After a brief interrogation, he was let free, and his fellow actors became free later on. But the Swan Theatre was becoming more or less derelict, and he couldn't go back to work here, so he had to find other employment, and eventually joined Philip Henslow and his Admiral's Men back in the Rose Theatre. So that was a brief little sketch of that, and that will come to mark a lot of Ben's career. He would kind of oscillate between grand successes and scandalous plays that caused offence to the courts or people in power, and which got him in trouble. Alright, so we are here right next to the National Theatre. We're looking over there the other side, because it's somewhere between the Strand, which is over there, and the Thames, where Ben Jonson was born. And he was born just a month after his father, who was a clergyman, after he had died. So he never came to know his real father, if you will. But he started out with quite an academic upbringing. So first he learned how to read and write in St. Martin-in-the-Fields School. And later he transitioned to Westminster School, which is where he met his first mentor in literary and the academic arts, which was William Camden, who was a renowned scholar himself. So he got first-rate teaching and mentorship from William Camden, who engendered the artistic side of him and helped him form him into what he would later become. Now, he went to Cambridge University, but he didn't get too far in his studies before he was called back by his stepfather, who needed help with a bricklaying job in the city of London. So he had to temporarily halt his studies and go back and help his father. But when he did that, that ensured his guild membership in the bricklaying guild known as the Tilers and Bricklayers Company, which ensured him citizenship in the city of London. Now, that was pretty unusual because most actors didn't have citizenship, so they had to rely on wealthy patrons to get certain rights and entrances to the city of London, whereas Ben Jonson could walk there more or less free because he had already gotten his citizenship, his pass, right? He was a freeman of the city of London because he was part of the guild, which may also, this is speculation, we don't know, but it might have helped him in those stints of unemployment when he didn't have any acting employment or creative work. He might have been able to add to his income through bricklaying and basically doing work in between with that. So that's pretty interesting. When he was about 18 and coming up in his early 20s, he traveled away from here to fight in Europe. So he served as a soldier for a brief stint, fighting against the Spanish in the Netherlands, partly, where he also had his first kill, if you will. He had a duel to the death, or he fought another soldier and actually killed him, which was sort of his, I'd say, part of what made him more of a gritty person, because he also fought, well, he certainly fought one duel here, but he got into a couple of scraps around here in London. One of them being with a fellow actor of his who was called Gabriel. We don't know why they fought a duel. We don't know what it was for or over. We just know that the actor was one of the actors that was imprisoned with him in Marshalsea jail for the scandals that he had committed at the Swan Theatre. So it's very likely that he had some kind of vendetta with his fellow actor, but we don't know what it was. But he fought him and killed him in Hoxton Fields, which I think paints an interesting picture of Ben Jonson. He's not just the loose-wristed writer and gentle poet. He was actually a bit of a soldier and a bit of a cold-blooded killer, perhaps. But maybe that's what you needed sometimes to survive on this side of the river, because it was a pretty rough place here 400 years ago, here on South Bank, a pretty lawless area. So he certainly wouldn't be the first actor to use rapiers and flintlock pistols. So, around the turn of the century, from 1599 to 1601 roughly, Ben Jonson began making waves in Blackfriars Theatre and in the Globe Theatre. And some of his plays actually ended all the way up here at the Royal Banqueting Hall and the rest of the Palace of Whitehall, where they made it to Queen Elizabeth's court. Now again, we don't know the reason why, but they weren't very well received by Queen Elizabeth and her court. So he didn't really manage to break through here until James I took to the throne, and in 1605 he made his first masque, which was called the Masque of Blackness, which was very well received by James I, and he started a partnership with the famous architect Inigo Jones, who helped him build his sets and all his props. And he would get actors in that came from South Bank, which we were in before, to come in and populate the masque, along with nobles and other courtiers who might want to have a little part in various roles. And that actually started giving him a place in court and making him an on-hand artist for James I's court. Even though he had gotten a place at court, it couldn't protect him from the authorities, because he would once again, in 1603 or early 1604, get in trouble with the authorities. The Privy Council would come back to haunt him. When he opened his play Sejanus' Fall, he was accused of treason and popery by the Privy Council. And later, in the next year, he performed Eastward Ho, which also landed some of his actors in prison for some of the same charges, and he voluntarily joined those actors in prison. So it seemed like his scandalous nature came to haunt him, at least from the purview of the authorities. And even here, he actually invented a new element to common masks and masquerades. He invented what was called the anti-mask, which was more of the dark side of the masquerade, if you will, where it was more populated with actors who were playing outrageous things, scandalous things, and generally you were allowed a more debauched, lustful air. More things were going on that would have been considered improper at a regular masquerade. And that was Ben's invention, actually. So he added something new to the English court, interestingly enough. Even more serious in his unlawful behavior, he was seen dining with the conspirators of the Gunpowder Plot in 1605 November, on the eve of its execution. So he might very well have been aware of their plans. he had also converted to Catholicism a little while before. So it is very likely that he shared some of the same sentiments of the conspirators who were planning to, of course, assassinate King James I. Now, after the discovery of the plot, he distanced himself from the conspirators. He was very quick to do that. He probably wanted to keep his position here at court. But he even offered to aid the Earl of Salisbury, who was the main investigator, trying to get to the depths of who the conspirators were. He offered to aid him with whatever information and knowledge he had. But yeah, that was another brush with death for him, because I'm sure he didn't want to end up in the Tower of London like someone like Guy Fawkes. So generally, he's been living on a knife's edge on the law. Alright then, so here we are at Westminster Abbey. We are reaching the end, because here we'll just mention briefly after his death, Ben Jonson is actually buried in here, in the north aisle, around the Poet's Corner. And there's some interesting little facts about his grave. He's got a little inscription over his grave saying, "Oh, most rare Ben." Now, what exactly that refers to, it could be his conversion to his Catholicism. It could be a reference to all the scandalous things, or apparently scandalous things that he's committed that we've already covered. We're not quite sure what it means. But there's another interesting feature of his grave. He's the only one in here in Westminster Abbey who's buried upright. So instead of lying horizontally, he's standing up in his grave. Now, I like to joke around that he probably did that to get a discount, because it might reveal that he had fallen on hard times by the time that he was going to be buried here. So him or his associates might have worked out a deal with the Abbey, so he would take up less space on the floor and come at a discounted price in here to be buried in Westminster Abbey, which is considered an honor, but an expensive honor. It might also be related to his Catholicism that he was buried that way, so it might not necessarily have to do with his money situation. We don't know for sure, but we know it's a funny old grave, so if you manage to find it in there, it's going to be a lot smaller than the other graves in there, interestingly enough.